Have you ever walked into a beautiful, room clean, styled, everything in place, but something still felt weirdly disconnected? The air's quiet, the light's warm, but the energy? Flat. Almost like the room is holding its breath. That feeling could be your plants. If this kind of wisdom speaks to you, thank you for being here. Feel free to hit like, subscribe, or even drop a comment below. It helps YouTube know you're part of this quiet, mindful shift. We all love indoor plants. They bring life into a space, clean the air, make us feel grounded and calm. But in Feng Shui, it's not just about having plants. It's about how they live with you. The wrong plant in the wrong place can disturb the flow. It can quietly kill the vibe of an entire room. Even if it looks green, even if it's thriving, if its energy doesn't align, it drains yours. In today's video, we're diving into 5 subtle but serious Feng Shui mistakes people make with indoor plants. And we'll fix each one with intention, clarity, and maybe a little surprise by the end. Let's begin. There was always this moment, right after people left Derek's apartment, when the air felt strange. Not empty, just stiff. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel calm. The kind that makes the room feel like it's holding tension in its jaw. He'd walk into the living room immaculate, as always wipe down the counter, rearrange the throw pillows, maybe fix the angle of the wall art. Everything looked good, sharp, styled. But the space never felt relaxed. Even when he was alone, it felt like the room was bracing for something. Or worse, like it didn't want anyone to stay long. And Derek had started to feel it in his own body. Shoulders tight, jaw slightly clenched. A tension he couldn't name. He told himself it was just the stress from work, or the Texas heat, or the fact that he hadn't really had a proper weekend in months. But deep down, something about his living room just felt uncomfortable. Not broken, just too much. Too stiff, too styled. Too disconnected from the people he actually wanted in it. In Feng Shui, plants are energy translators. They don't just decorate. They shift how energy moves, how it rests, how it welcomes. And spiky plants like the snake plant by Derek's sofa or the twin cacti on either side of the coffee berry classic Feng Shui mistakes in shared spaces. Why? Because their energy is projective. It cuts. It extends outward like little swords, creating what Feng Shui calls Sha-Qi piercing energy that disrupts flow, soft connection, and emotional openness. In bedrooms, this type of energy can disturb rest. In living rooms, it can kill the vibe entirely. When Derek's friends sat on his sofa, they didn't lean in. They sat upright, ankles crossed, arms folded. Even his friend Julian joked once, "Man, this couch feels like it's judging me." He laughed it off, but it hit something real. Because vibe isn't about candles or color palettes. It's about energy landing softly. And Derek's living room? It looked amazing, but it felt sharp, tense, blocked. Derek had always used design to protect himself. Growing up in a house with constant noise, 3 siblings, 2 working parents, chaos on a loop craved stillness. Order, edges. His first apartment was beige and bare. His second was color-blocked and symmetrical. By the time he bought his condo in Austin, he was deep into intentional minimalism. Clean lines, metal accents, sharp succulents, geometry everywhere. It made him feel in control. Safe. But control doesn't always mean comfort. And sharp doesn't always mean strong. The plants, those spiky little guardians in every social corner, weren't just decor. They were barriers. Unspoken signs that said, "Welcome, but not too much. Come in, but don't stay long." He didn't realize it until he saw how people behaved in the space. Micah always stood. Rachel always brought wine and left early. Julian used to sprawl on couches. Now he sat on bar stools. It wasn't personal. It was the room. And it was a mirror of Derek's internal world. Well-designed, well-maintained, but closed off. It's like setting up chairs in a perfect circle and placing a cactus in the center. No one leans in. Everyone guards their knees. Or imagine throwing a dinner party and using barbed wire as a centerpiece. It's subtle, decorative, edgy, but it makes people eat fast and talk less. That was Derek's living room. It was a boutique hotel lounge. Gorgeous, yes, but you wouldn't take your shoes off there. You wouldn't cry on that couch. You wouldn't stay. What finally shifted things wasn't some dramatic moment. It was a late-night scroll through YouTube. He stumbled on a Feng Shui consultant woman from Portland with soft lighting and a calming voice who explained that spiky plants should never sit in high interaction zones. "Think of energy like people," she said. "If something looks defensive, energy won't approach. Neither will your friends." He paused the video, looked around his living room, and saw it all at once. The aloe vera pointing at the entry. The snake plant slicing the corner of the sectional. The cactus literally eye level with anyone sitting across the coffee table. It wasn't welcoming. It was a minefield in ceramic pots. That Saturday, Derek made a quiet decision. He took a deep breath and picked up the snake plant first. He moved it to his studio room, his work cave. The cacti went to the window ledge in the hallway. He bought a peace lily, just one, and placed it near the sofa. Broad, round leaves, soft green. It didn't match the rest of the room. But the next time Julian came over, he didn't sit on the bar stool. He flopped on the couch and stayed until 1 a.m. Rachel brought cookies, not wine, and Micah sat down for once. And for the first time, Derek didn't clean immediately after they left. He just sat and felt open. Now the snake plant's in his studio, guarding the space where he works alone. It was a small visit. No warning. Just a quick text from Chloe that said, "I'm in Austin for a week. Mind if I swing by?" They hadn't seen each other in 3 years. Chloe was one of those people who could make a thrift store couch look like it belonged in a design magazine. Effortless, confident, always with a cup of something herbal in her hand, and 3 bracelets that made no sense, but worked. Derek cleaned up the living room, straightened the peace lily's leaves, lit a candle. When she arrived, they hugged, laughed, and settled in. Then Chloe paused mid-conversation and looked down at the plant next to the kitchen island. It sat in a cheap, faded terracotta pot. One Derek had bought on impulse from a dollar bin 5 years ago. It was chipped on one side, slightly tilted, and wrapped with a rubber band he'd meant to remove weeks ago. She didn't say anything cruel, just raised an eyebrow and smiled. "This little guy's still fighting, huh?" she said softly. "That pot's giving early Craigslist energy." Derek laughed. But then he looked around. Suddenly, he saw it. The white, glossy pot by the television. The cracked green one on the windowsill. The loud painted ceramic planter he bought from a street fair. That clashed with literally everything. Each plant was trying its best, but none of them looked like they belonged. The room wasn't a vibe. It was a thrift store argument. In Feng Shui, the pot isn't just a holder. It's the home. It defines the message that plant sends out. A beautiful plant in a cheap, mismatched, or broken container doesn't just look off. It feels tired. It says, "I haven't been tended to." It whispers, "This is good enough, I guess." And when that's the energy you place in your kitchen, your hallway, your sacred corners, guess what sticks? That quiet feeling of settling. That almost vibe. That mental clutter you can't quite name, but always feel when you walk in. Derek always thought of himself as intentional. But now he realized he had gotten lazy. Not in a bad way, just in a disconnected way. He never thought a pot mattered. But now, it felt like walking into a gallery where each painting had a dented frame. The flow was broken. Visually, energetically. It's kind of like wearing a tailored shirt with gym shorts. Sure, you're dressed, but the energy? Confused. Or hosting a dinner with beautiful plates and plastic forks. That was Derek's plant setup. Everything almost right. But almost has its own vibration. And it's not peace. Later that night, he sat on the floor and lined up all his plants. Some were doing okay. Some were struggling. But it was the pots that really stood out. One still had a Home Depot sticker. One had dirt crusted around the rim. One looked like it belonged to someone else's house entirely. Each pot had a past, but none of them were present. He texted Chloe. "Okay, give me 3 brands you love for nice, but not fancy planters." She sent a few links. And a heart emoji. The next day, Derek picked 3 neutral textured pots. One in soft gray clay, one matte white with a ripple edge, and one a warm taupe that felt like sunlight. He repotted only the plants that felt ready. The rest, he placed aside gently. A kind of plant pause. And when he stood up, the whole room felt different. Not louder, just more whole. That Sunday, Rachel came over to borrow some measuring tape. She stepped in, paused, and smiled. "Did you do something in here? It feels smoother." He just nodded. Now, the mismatched pots are in a box by the door. He's donating them next weekend. And every time he walks by the peace lily in its new gray pot, he swears the thing looks taller. Sometimes it's not the plant. It's what you're asking it to live in. And in Feng Shui, that makes all the difference. It crept up on him, the way clutter always does. One plant on the windowsill became 3. A fern in the bathroom. A pothos trailing over the hallway mirror. Then 2 more. Then a mini monstera next to the record shelf. And suddenly, Derek's home felt busy. Not loud, just visually loud. He walked through the living room with a glass of water and had to shift sideways to avoid knocking into a plant stand. Twice that week, he bumped into the same rubber fig near the hallway corner. The peace lily by the sofa he's pried just weeks ago looked dimmer somehow. The vibe had changed again. Not tense like before, Just too much. Like someone had whispered, "Grow," into the room, and it had listened all at once. In Feng Shui, plants represent wood energy. Growth, vitality, expansion. But too much of any element, especially in small space, creates imbalance. When you overload a room with plants, you're telling energy, "Expand here, keep growing, don't stop." But some rooms aren't meant to expand. They're meant to hold, to breathe, to settle your nervous system after a long day. Derek's bedroom, once calm and minimal, was now a mini jungle. Even the air felt thicker. Energy wasn't flowing. It was getting tangled, like threads pulled in different directions. Nothing could settle. Part of it was loneliness. Derek hadn't named it that, but it had been there. After Chloe's visit, he went on a small redecorating spree. It started with changing pots, then colors, then plants. Buying more, rearranging, feeling productive. Each new plant felt like momentum, a sense of progress. But what he was really doing was filling space, so he didn't have to sit with it. There's a difference between decorating a home and distracting yourself from silence. Derek didn't know which side he was on anymore. It was like trying to meditate in a room full of television screens, all muted, but still flickering. Or like hosting a dinner party, where every guest talks just a little too much. At the same time, nothing's wrong, but nothing rests. The room wasn't hostile. It was just over-engaged. And when everything's competing for attention, from the giant fiddle leaf to the baby succulents, the space doesn't feel alive. It feels noisy. He didn't figure it out on his own. It was Rachel who pointed it out. She dropped by to return a tape measure and paused in the doorway. "Wow," she said slowly. "Are you starting a plant shop?" He smiled, then paused, looked around. It did look like a boutique, not a home. That night, he watched a short Feng Shui video someone had posted on TikTok. Just a woman talking about plant overload. "One plant energizes a space," she said. 3 can harmonize it. 10 might overwhelm it, especially if the space isn't asking for that much energy to begin with. That line stuck with him. What was his space asking for? That weekend, Derek did something he hadn't done in years. He removed plants. Not all. Just the ones that didn't feel essential. The ones he'd bought to fill space. The ones that had no story, no presence. He gave some to neighbors. Rachel took 2. Julian picked up one for his studio. The rest he arranged by the window in the hallway like a soft plant lounge. The next day, he stood in the middle of his apartment, breathed, and for the first time in weeks, felt stillness. Now every plant has a little more elbow room. So does Derek. And when people visit, they don't say, "Wow, you have a lot of plants." They just say, "It feels good in here." If this kind of story speaks to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, or drop a comment below. That small moment of support helps YouTube share this quiet kind of Feng Shui with more homes like yours. It was quiet that afternoon. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in wide, lazy stripes. The apartment was still, warm, silent. Derek was making tea when he noticed it. Not a sound, not a feeling. Just a tiny layer of dust. It shimmered along the edge of a rubber fig's leaf like someone had brushed it with chalk. He ran his finger across it and left a clean trail. The plant didn't look sick. It didn't look neglected. But something about it felt tired, like it hadn't been breathed on in weeks. He started walking around the room. The pothos by the entryway? Dull. The peace lily? Still standing, but not glowing. Even the cactus on the bookshelf had dust settling into the curves. He hadn't seen it before. But now that he did, he couldn't unsee it. In Feng Shui, dust is stagnant energy made visible. It's the energetic version of stale air. It tells the room, nothing moves here, nothing grows here. When plants gather dust, their energy weakens. They lose their capacity to uplift, to purify, to activate flow. Dust signals pause. And when it builds on life on leaves meant to breathe, it says, this life is being ignored. Even the most beautiful plant loses its energy when it's coated in neglect. Derek had been so focused on removing excess, on matching pots, on clearing space, that he forgot to care for what stayed. And what stayed was fading. It was a classic Feng Shui mistake. Not the wrong object, just the invisible blockage around the right ones. Julian came over that night with takeout. They sat on the floor eating noodles and watching something dumb. Halfway through, Julian squinted at the peace lily and said, "Dude, when did your plants get so dusty?" Derek looked at him. "I've been busy," he muttered. But the truth was deeper. He'd done the work. He'd made changes. He'd decluttered, replanted, even shared his extras. But part of him, the tired part, stopped engaging after that. He thought fixing the big stuff was enough, that letting things settle meant peace. But he hadn't been paying attention. Sometimes the smallest neglects carry the biggest messages. He didn't mean to let them go. He just went a little numb. It was like replying to every email, but never checking the drafts folder. Or like washing your hands, but forgetting to clean under your nails. Or brushing your teeth, without rinsing the sink. Small things, invisible, but they speak. They say where your energy stops. And in Derek's case, it had stopped at the surface. Rachel had once told him months ago that plants, like people, need attention without crisis. Don't just touch them when they're dying, she said. Touch them when they're fine. That's how they stay that way. At the time, he smiled and nodded. Now it rang in his head like a bell. He looked it up later that night. A simple gardening blog. It said, "Dust blocks light. Light is life. If you wouldn't let dust gather on your skin, don't let it sit on a leaf." He blinked. He hadn't meant to ignore them. But somehow, care had become another checkbox. And energy? It noticed. He filled a small bowl with water, took a soft cloth, and started wiping. One leaf, then another. Not rushing, just moving gently, listening to the room. It felt strange at first, like apologizing, like showing up late to something you didn't know you missed. But as the dust cleared, the shine came back. The plants didn't suddenly look new, but they looked awake. So did the room. So did he. Julian watched from the sofa. "Look at you. Plant spa day?" Derek grinned. "Just reminding them I'm here." Julian raised his cup to the dust we didn't know was weighing us down. And Derek smiled, because yeah, that was exactly it. The plant never stood a chance. It sat quietly under the floating bookshelf, tucked into a corner Derek rarely looked at, until the day it finally gave up. The leaves had started to curl, not from thirst, not from light, but from something heavier. He picked it up, and for the first time noticed how his own body reacted. A tightness in the chest, like holding breath near something that feels too still, too pressed down. The plant wasn't just in a bad spot. It was living under weight. That corner, once minimal in his eyes, suddenly looked like a silent squeeze. In Feng Shui, a heavy object above a living thing creates compressive energy. Whether it's a beam, a cabinet, or a shelf full of books, the message is the same. You are being held down. Energy can't rise. It can't cycle. It sits heavy like fog that won't lift. And when you place a plant, a symbol of growth, of breath, of wood energy, directly underneath that weight, you block its essence. You silence its movement, and you create a subtle message in the space. Stay small, don't stretch. It's one of the most overlooked Feng Shui mistakes, because it's quiet, unspoken, but deeply felt. Derek remembered something his mom once said. Years ago, after he got his first real job. "You always carry it all," she told him. "But you never let it show." That day, holding the plant, he felt that sentence hit him again. He'd put so much work into this home. Every fix, every shift, every plant, done to create calm. But something still felt off. Not bad, just low. Not stuck, but held. Like part of him wasn't rising. He realized he hadn't just placed a plant under that shelf. He'd placed part of himself there too. It's like sleeping under a low ceiling. You don't notice at first, but over time your dreams feel shorter. Or like working at a desk with a cabinet right above your head. Your shoulders hunch. Your thoughts shrink. That's what that corner had become. Not a design flaw, but an energetic ceiling. One that whispered, "Stay here, don't push upward." And Derek had listened without knowing it. Julian, as usual, didn't say much. Just walked in one Saturday, looked at the shelf, and muttered, "That thing always gave me the creeps." Derek blinked. "Really?" "Yeah. I don't know. Feels like it's looming. Even the plant looks nervous." Later that day, Derek looked it up. A Feng Shui blog by an architect in Vancouver. One line stood out. "A beam is not just structure, it's psychological. What hangs above lives inside." He didn't need more explanation. He felt it in his breath. He cleared the shelf, took down the books, removed the bracket. The whole thing. The wall looked naked for a moment, but the room breathed different. Then he moved the plant. Not far, just beside the window. Under open space. He didn't expect much, but the next morning, new leaves. Julian raised an eyebrow. "Moved it, huh?" Derek nodded. "Yeah, no more plant therapy under the guillotine." Julian chuckled. "Guess you finally let that corner go." Derek looked over. "Yeah," he said, "and maybe it let go of me too." Sometimes, fixing the vibe in your home isn't about adding more. It's about seeing what's been quietly speaking to you. Through corners, through dust, through leaves that used to stand taller. Each plant we touched today wasn't just about Feng Shui. It was about you. and what your space might be asking for. If something in this video stirred something in you, even just a little, take a breath, take a look around, and maybe take one gentle step. If this kind of mindful Feng Shui speaks to you, we share 2 new videos every day here. Feel free to like, subscribe, share it with someone you care about, or drop a comment below. Your energy here means more than you know. And if you're still listening, there's another video in this channel that might speak even more deeply to where you are right now. Let it find you. Let it guide you. Your space speaks. Wisdom listens.